Hey everyone, this is my first video as Spider-Man EDH, and the idea behind this channel is pretty simple. I just really like Spider-Man and magic, and I really like the Spider-Man set, even though like nobody else likes that set for good reason. It is a pretty mediocre set at best, but some of the Spider-Man commanders I thought were pretty cool. So I was like, I'm going to build all the Spider-Man commanders I like. So the goal of this channel is just to build all the Spider-Man commander, all the Peter Parker Spider-Man commanders. Because I don't know, I just like it. But I kind of wanted to start off my first video with my favorite commander deck / my favorite commander, which is Sensational Spider-Man. When he attacks, you can tap a target creature defending player controls and put a stun counter on it. Then you may remove up to 3 stun counters from among all permanents. Draw cards equal to the number of stun counters removed this way. Some things to note about this commander. 1, super important, you can only tap and put a stun counter on something that you're swinging at, or at someone you're swinging at. So I can't, let's say, swing at player A and tap something and put a stun counter on something that's on player B's board. Super important to note that. 2, although you can only swing at the person you're planning to tap and stun stuff on, you still can remove stun counters from anything at all. Super important to note that. I thought this was like the most interesting commander because it's so flavorful to Spider-Man, who webs people up. I thought that was really cool. And so also he's my favorite color combination ever. So I thought, hey, let's build a commander out of this. And it's become my favorite commander. So the thing that people do when they build this commander is they like to run cards like Hilda or like Wicked Slumber, which are valuing off tapping and stunning things, and or using instants and sorceries to stun things. And then they like to proliferate the stun counters, which is not necessarily a bad way to go about it. But when I've done it that way, it's kind of mediocre because cards like Wicked Slumber on paper look good with this commander where you're tapping 2 things down. Well, actually, you can convoke it, so it's actually a little bit better than a CMC 4. But, higher CMC tap effects that put stun counters on things. Because you're in blue-white and you're not in green, 4 CMC is actually kind of a lot. And Hilda's ability, although Hilda's not bad in any way, revolving your strategy around her is not that good because she's also a little bit mana intensive. And again, in blue-white, you're not really, you're not going to be using, you don't want to use the mana for something like that, where you can use that mana for other things that are better. So what I did was clones, because I wanted to clone my commander to maximize the effect, because he only can tap 1 thing down every single turn, and most instants and sorceries can only tap 1 other thing down. But let's say you have 2 or 3 or 5 of your commander. You can just tap someone's entire board and just either stop them from swinging or draw a ton of cards. So clones was the logic of this deck. And also, the Clone Saga is an arc in Spider-Man comics. Get it? That's why because the clones. You clone your commander. Clone Saga. That sounded like 1,000 times better in my own head. I just want to throw it out there before. You ever get a scratch on your nose and you can't scratch it because whatever. Anyway, so the cards you kind of want to run are cards that clone your commander, or cards that cards that clone your commander without being legendary because of the legendary rule, of course, or cards that become clones of something else but retain their name. So Chameleon, Sakashima, Irma, Quantum Misalignment, Ember Island Production, file duplication. Those kind of clone effects are the really only clone effects you want to run because you want to target your commander with their effects. However, there are a lot of cards that clone other people's things too, and there have been many games where I've won because I cloned someone else's thing. That is super important to remember, that sometimes some cards can clone other people's things, and that is usually where your win con comes from. That's part of the reason why I love this deck so much, is because you can, like, it requires a lot of thought and what, like, you want to do in terms of combat, you know, counter spelling, and what you want to clone. If you can clone not your commander. Usually it's your commander. The two main all-stars of this deck, which are actually low-key my two favorite cards in Magic, which is also another reason why I kind of want, like, this is my favorite commander deck, is Imposter Syndrome and Kindred Discovery. So the real inspiration for this version of the deck was actually Imposter Syndrome and not Clone Saga. It just so happens that they're kind of similar and that's like the same game plan. And what Imposter Syndrome does is whenever a non-token creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. This actually is my favorite card in Magic for lots of reasons. I think it's just a neat card. So what the idea behind it is you want to tap your opponent's things down so you can get free hits in and, you know, clone your commander as many times as humanly possible with this card. So because you're cloning your commander so much, Kindred Discovery, I can talk. Kindred Discovery is super, super good because you just go name like something like spiders or humans or something, or hero, I guess. Probably, I think human actually might be the best to pick because you do run a couple humans that aren't Spider-Man. And every single time they enter or attack, you draw a card. So because it lines up with the game plan, you're drawing even more cards. So the main win con of this deck is Approach of the Second Sun. Because, yeah, cloning your commander is really cool. You know, combat control and, like, control in general can be really, really sick. But sometimes it puts a target in your back, and blue-white doesn't have a lot of good ways to win that is based on combat. However, I've won with combat with this deck way more than I've won with Approach the Second Sun. It's just I think Approach the Second Sun is kind of needed in this deck. Also, it's my favorite win con of all of Magic, which is another reason why it's my favorite deck to play. So pretty much, in case you don't know, Approach the Second Sun is if you cast it from your hand and you cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun, you win the game. Otherwise, you put Approach in the top 7th of your library and you gain 7 life. So pretty much what you do is you go Approach Second Sun, draw a bunch of cards, play it again. That is the main win con that you kind of like are resorting to do if the cloning combat stuff doesn't really work out. A big skill like gap of this deck also is knowing when to approach, because sometimes you don't want to approach as soon as you can because you might put a target on your back and you might not be able to handle 3 opponents at the same time. It's very, very good late game where like things have slowed down. Like you have to know when to play it, which is another reason again why it's my favorite deck to play. So 2 other all-stars in this deck that's super worth mentioning is Everybody Lives and Flare of Fortitude. I actually think I also run Comeuppance, but pretty much the idea is still the same. You want to run Fogs in this deck because, yeah, you have, you know, your copies of your commander swinging at people and stunning their stuff. You still got to worry about 2 other people, and sometimes you have to use your Fogs. Every time I draw these 2 cards, I feel really, really good. And like I feel like I'm actually gonna be able to win and like survive. It's just such a nice blanket. I actually pretty much almost always run Fogs in white decks, especially like these 2 specific cards, because of how important they are, especially if you're gonna approach the Second Sun deck. Like you have to run these cards. I think these 2 specific cards are really cool, and because Flare of Fortitude, you can sack a white creature, most copies of your commander, you can sack a copy to make it free. Another thing to note is this deck does not run Game Changers. It's kind of meant for bracket 2 to 3. It's like no, you never want this in a 4-pod. A bracket 4-pod is just no go for this deck. And because of that, we're not running Teferi's Protection. If I was trying to make this deck stronger and start running Game Changers, even though that goes against my entire philosophy, Teferi's Protection would be the first thing I add. But you do want to run Fogs. Fogs are super important. And you also want to run effects that protect your board outside of these cards, like Boromir, Spectacular Spider-Man. Like, cards that protect your board are actually super important because you need to rely on a board state with a lot of copies of your commander. So this is kind of an ideal scenario. Let's say you have 5 copies of your commander. Somehow, through because Imposter Syndrome and Kindred Discovery, or not Kindred Discovery, I guess. It would be Imposter Syndrome and just various different effects. And let's say you go and swing with 5 copies. You get to stun 5 things on your opponent's board, then draw 5 cards to Kindred Discovery. Then you can remove those stun counters if you want, draw 5 more cards, and if you do connect with your commander, you get another copy of your commander, thus letting you draw another card. So you get to draw a ton of cards in a singular turn if you have enough copies of your commander while having Kindred Discovery on board. But Imposter Syndrome is one of the main engines of this deck. That's mostly kind of what I want to talk about, but there's a few footnotes I kind of want to throw in there before I head on out of here. Is this commander is also one of my favorites because when I do use it, a lot of people will have a really big creature and I'll stun it down, and that gives you some political points. People are like, oh, you're actually saving the table. So someone else is a threat and you're helping answer those threats. Sensational Spider-Man's actually really good at doing that, but only when it comes to combat stuff, which in the power level 2 to 3 bracket, that's always going to happen. Something I noticed, or something I said, was I don't run a lot of cards that tap something down and put stun counters on them. That is technically not entirely true. I still do run the 2 CMC ones that put 3 stun counters on something, because you can, at worst, for 2 CMC, put 3 stun counters on something, draw 3 cards when you swing, and put another stun counter on something. That's actively really strong. So the 2 CMC ones I still keep in the deck because they're just too decent in this deck. But it's not technically meant for the game plan in comparison to the clone idea. Anyway, I would love to yap about this deck some more. But that can be for another time. Please check out my deck on Moxfield that I will have in the description. And I hope you like this, and I'll come up with more Spider-Man commander decks that we can yap about together. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you later.